Welcome friends! In this series I play a selected retro console game and then follow that with a simple question. Is it engaging or is it enraging? Today's game is a home console port of the genre-defining first-person shooter Wolfenstein 3D for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and was released in March of 1994. Developed by id Software and produced by Imagineer, the SNES was one of many homes for the grandfather of first-person shooters. Standing out from the many ports produced over the years, the SNES version was plagued with problems during its development phase. The publisher Imagineer originally tasked a different, undisclosed developer to produce the game. However, when this 9-month-long arrangement collapsed, the original creators of Wolfenstein 3D at id Software were brought in and tasked to complete the entire final build of the game in the space of 3 weeks. Having only 3 weeks to port any game to the SNES in this manner is just utterly unthinkable, and it's highly commendable that the original creators of Wolfenstein 3D at id Software managed to produce anything at all within this scant time frame, especially a port to much weaker hardware than the PC. The remaining ports that appeared on later generation consoles such as the Atari Jaguar and the 3DO were highly competent conversions, and even the sole portable version for the Game Boy Advance from 2002 was a capable, albeit heavily stripped back experience, with the music and weapon choices being the main casualties. With the SNES and the Game Boy Advance having a lot of hardware in common, where does our highly pressured and inhumanely quickly produced SNES port sit? Although the SNES was an excellent console, it was one generation behind the likes of the Atari Jaguar or the 3DO, and it simply couldn't come close to matching the specifications required by the full PC release of the game, so it'll come as no surprise that this would become one of the most compromised versions of the game to date. When we compare the visuals to the PC original, we can immediately see that they've taken a severe hit. The zoomed in perspective feels like you're sat a millimetre away from your TV no matter where you're sat in the room itself. The resolution and draw distance make the game look like it was entirely constructed out of Duplo blocks, while the overall presentation of the graphics give the impression that you are looking at the screen through an opaque plastic bag with eyes made entirely of cataracts. In addition to performing the digital equivalent of squeezing an elephant into a suitcase, they were also having to contend with the baffling, maniacal, lunatic, pointless cogitations of Uncle Nintendo and his censorship shotgun with the words child-friendly emblazoned on the side in crayon. Fresh from their recent pointless escapade of having sufficiently ruined the SNES version of Mortal Kombat, they got to work earning their next Pyrrhic victory by sandblasting away the whole premise of Wolfenstein 3D and their typical frenzied scattershot manner. The mention of the game's protagonist BJ Blazkowicz escaping a 1940s castle Wolfenstein and eventually killing a mechanised version of the Führer was met with the expected levels of incredulous red-faced bellowing disapproval from Uncle Nintendo, who commenced this latest bedwetting exercise with a hysterical fervour. All imagery associated with the Führer was incinerated, including the 3 pixels that made up his moustache, accidentally creating a new character I will insist on calling Hilter, rather than their name Statmeister, along with wiping away any reference to German history. Well, besides this reference to Dresden on the first mission. Thorough work, lads! We now have a story boiled down to, you are a one-man operative, go and shoot the naughty things that the president deems a threat, and be rewarded with a single-word victory screen, followed by being shown the cast of 5 blurry creatures and 5.5 nebulous bosses you've continuously fought for the last 4 hours. Even this mutant isn't anywhere near as good as the disco dancing version I saw earlier in the game. For a game whose entire raison d'etre is to point guns at the things you plan to exterminate in the immediate future, it's reasonable to expect there may be violence involved. It was at this point Uncle Nintendo looked at the changes made so far and concluded that this version wasn't sufficiently crippled enough and went to town on the game itself. To begin, the blood was downgraded from being red to being green and then removed entirely in favour of sweat, except for when BJ's health is below 25%. How dare these peasants continue to defy the mighty Nintendo! The attack dogs from the original were replaced with mutated rats, and ammo was changed to shot, along with health being changed to HP, for reasons I cannot even pretend to assimilate. Why Uncle Nintendo felt that the act of pointing your pixelated Bang Bang stick at a killer attack dog was a moral aberration but mowing down wave after wave of human guards remains perfectly acceptable is again beyond the bounds of my meagre comprehension. With this utterly pointless and arbitrary pissing contest out of the way, id Software used the 14 seconds of development time that remained to sharpen their knives and slice away more chunks of the game to have any hope of getting it to function on the SNES. The graphical compromises from before were accompanied by the loss of a further 31 levels and the use of simplified versions for the 29 levels that remained. Given that each pixel on the screen is about the size of the box the game cartridge came in, the addition of the overview map was a welcome function for this version and makes the game slightly less tortuous to navigate. Oh look! Here's one of Uncle Nintendo's altered murals in all of its mustacheless glory. Hail Hortler! Right, enough of that, on with the mission. The sound choices on offer are a mix of pleasant and bloody awful in equal measure. The 3 music tracks are perfectly adequate with how they accompany the gameplay, and most of the sound effects are perfectly pleasant. However, when I hear the sound of a mutated rat's demise, or a boss and his underwear soiling threat that is coming for you, it's usually accompanied by a further 10 seconds of the sound of me rolling around on the floor, knocking over furniture and laughing myself into a coma. You get the occasional stop, or halt, from the multiple drones that meander pointlessly about the levels, and that's it. Overall, the sound choices are certainly not the most irksome element of this game. We can leave that dismal honour to the gameplay itself. After controlling BJ for a while, you'll be convinced that the whole game is part of a Disney production of Wolfenstein 3D on Ice, and that BJ turns like he stood atop a car showroom's turntable. Along with the controller input lag, it's easy to get BJ stuck on corners, continually faffing around trying to open doors, and always somehow managing to run a meter or two past where you'll think you'll stop, and this is further compounded if you dare to press the sprint key. Having independent left and right strafing buttons was a nice addition, but in practice these new directions of movement glide just as badly as the others. Due to further limitations with the game, we now have a situation where every enemy is always facing you. Not only does this mean that you absolutely cannot get the drop on any enemy you encounter, but if you dare to run blindly into a room, you're likely to have one side of your head Swiss cheese by an enemy you couldn't have possibly seen, that will finish the job long before you submit the paperwork required to get your blockheaded fool to turn around and face them. Onto the weapons, and we have 2 new enemy smiting options bestowed upon us for the SNES version. However, the game being unable to resist the urge to further annoy the player, now has problems with cycling between weapons, so picking up a new gun effectively cancels out the existence of the previous one. With most of the game's strong weaponry being stuffed behind multiple hidden walls, BJ will spend a great deal of his time grunting and poking at the scenery until a blurry amorphous splat of a wall eventually arthritically moves, and surrenders its usually disappointing bounty. Thanks to the utterly broken weapon swapping shenanigans, you'll have to pick up these new weapons in a tactical manner, or you'll end up wasting your good guns on worthless grunts, and have to sit there plinking at the boss with peas, pebbles and balls of rolled up tissue as they quickly retaliate by painting the walls with your pureed viscera. Thanks to all this mania, the game's difficulty lies somewhere between opera singing while concussed and trying to put on makeup in a car that is currently tumbling down the side of a cliff. To distract yourself mildly from this digitised self-flagellating escapade, you can pick up shiny treasure that results in the minor increase of this utterly bloody pointless score counter and nothing else. Finally, you can pick up lives to prolong the pain, and at least the game has the grace of including a password system so you can postpone your current anger-induced kicking until another day. Having explored all the highs and lows this first-person shooter has to offer, is this game engaging, or is it enraging? After playing this game in full from start to finish, I can conclude that Wolfenstein 3D for the SNES is an enraging game. Despite the valiant efforts of id Software, who later disowned this port, the SNES simply couldn't handle a game of this nature. The extremely tight deadline, along with having to rework a considerable downgrade and needless meddling from Nintendo, colluded to produce an unfairly difficult, frustrating and visually off-putting experience. Until next time on Engaging or Enraging, goodbye friends.